Detective Sarah Martinez's phone shattered the peaceful silence of her suburban home at exactly 2:34 a.m. The harsh ringtone cut through her dreams like a knife, yanking her from sleep with the familiar dread that accompanied middle-of-the-night calls in her line of work. As a 15-year veteran of the Metro Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division, she knew that calls at this hour meant one thing. Someone's world had just been destroyed. "Martinez," she answered, her voice instantly alert, despite the grogginess clinging to her mind. "We've got a homicide on Maple Street." Sergeant Johnson's gruff voice crackled through the phone. "Young woman, early 20s. But there's more. There's a missing child involved. 3-year-old girl. We need you here now." Sarah's blood ran cold. Child cases were always the worst. They haunted her dreams and followed her home, tiny faces appearing in quiet moments when she least expected them. But they were also why she joined the force 20 years ago, to be the voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Throwing on her clothes in the darkness, Sarah grabbed her badge and service weapon from the nightstand. Her husband Michael stirred beside her, mumbling a sleepy, "Be careful," as she barely heard as she rushed out the door. The October night. Air bit through her jacket as she hurried to her unmarked sedan, the streetlights casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and shift as she drove through the empty streets. The Chun family home sat in an upscale neighborhood where manicured lawns and luxury cars spoke of comfortable lives and assumed safety. But tonight, that illusion of security lay shattered along with everything else. Police cars lined the street, their red and blue lights painting the darkness in urgent colors. Crime scene tape fluttered in the autumn breeze, and neighbors stood in small clusters on their porches, whispering anxiously among themselves despite the late hour. Sarah badged her way through the perimeter at 2:47 a.m. precisely, noting the time out of habit. Every detail mattered in investigations like these. Officer Patricia Coleman, first on the scene, approached her immediately, her face pale in the porch light. "What do we have?" Sarah asked, pulling on her latex gloves while her eyes swept the scene. "Victim is Rebecca Foster, 19 years old, college sophomore at State University," Coleman reported, consulting her notepad. "She was babysitting for the Chun family tonight. Dr. James Chun and his wife Lisa were at a medical conference dinner downtown. They found the body when they came home around 2:15 a.m. Sarah stepped through the front door and immediately felt the weight of violence that had occurred here. The living room told a story of struggle, an overturned coffee table, scattered magazines, a lamp knocked to the floor with its shade askew. But it was the kitchen where the true horror revealed itself. Rebecca Foster lay motionless on the white tile floor, her blonde hair fanned out in a tragic halo. Blood had pooled beneath her head, dark and congealed in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Her nursing textbooks were scattered nearby, along with what appeared to be the remnants of her evening study session. An empty coffee mug, highlighters, and notebook pages now stained crimson. "Blunt force trauma to the head," the medical examiner called out from where he knelt beside the body. "Multiple impacts. She fought hard." Sarah's trained eyes took in every detail, cataloging evidence and forming preliminary theories. The sliding glass door to the backyard stood slightly ajar, cold October air drifting through the gap. No signs of forced entry at the front door, which suggested the perpetrator either had a key or had been let inside willingly. "Where are the parents now?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the rage building in her chest. This young woman had died protecting someone else's child. There was no more noble way to lose one's life. "In the living room with victim services," Coleman replied. Well, you can imagine. But detective, there's something else. Something that's got everyone rattled." Sarah looked up sharply. "The child?" "Emma Chun, 3 years old. She's missing. Parents say she was definitely here when they left at 6 p.m. Rebecca confirmed by text at 8:30 that Emma was asleep in her bed, but when they got home, Coleman's voice trailed off. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Either the killer had taken Emma, which painted this crime in an even darker light, or the little girl was hiding somewhere, traumatized beyond measure. Both possibilities made Sarah's stomach clench with professional dread and maternal instinct. "We've searched the house twice," Coleman continued. "Every room, every closet, under every bed. No sign of her." Sarah made a decision that would prove crucial to the case. "Get Rodriguez and Bruno here now. If that little girl is hiding somewhere in this house, we need the best team to find her." Canine Officer Mark Rodriguez arrived within minutes. His German Shepherd partner Bruno, sitting alertly in the passenger seat of the specially equipped patrol car. Rodriguez was a 10-year veteran of the K9 unit, and Bruno was his second partner, a 7-year-old German Shepherd with an impressive track record in tracking, drug detection, and search and rescue operations. "What's the situation?" Rodriguez asked as he approached, Bruno already sensing the tension and urgency in the air. 3-year-old girl, missing since sometime after 8:30 p.m., Sarah explained quickly. "House has been searched twice by officers, but we need Bruno's nose. If she's here, she's hiding really well." Rodriguez nodded grimly and gave Bruno the command to begin searching. The dog immediately went to work, his black nose moving constantly as he processed the scents in the house. Bruno moved methodically through each room, Rodriguez following closely behind, both of them focused entirely on their task. Sarah watched the search while coordinating with the crime scene technicians who had begun processing evidence. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity when a child's life hung in the balance. The parents, Dr. James Chun and his wife Lisa, sat in the living room answering questions from Detective Warren, their faces masks of barely controlled panic and grief. Then, from the master bedroom, came Bruno's urgent barking, the specific alert bark that meant he'd found something significant. Rodriguez's voice called out immediately, "We've got something." Sarah rushed down the hallway, her heart pounding with hope and fear in equal measure. She found Rodriguez standing in front of a large walk-in closet, Bruno sitting at attention beside him, tail wagging slightly, but eyes focused intently on the closet's depths. "She's in there," Rodriguez said quietly, "but she's not responding to our voices." Sarah approached the closet carefully, pushing aside winter coats and formal dresses until she could see into the far corner. There, curled into the smallest possible ball behind a row of Lisa Chun's evening gowns, was Emma Chun, the 3-year-old. Girl was physically unharmed. Sarah could see that immediately, but emotionally, she was somewhere else entirely. Emma's dark brown eyes stared straight ahead with a blank expression that Sarah had seen before in trauma victims. Her small body was rigid, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, and despite the gentle voices calling her name, she showed no recognition or response. "Emma, sweetheart, you're safe now," Sarah whispered, slowly extending her hand. "We're here to help you." But Emma didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge their presence at all. She had witnessed something so terrifying that her young mind had simply shut down, retreating into a protective shell of silence. Bruno, seeming to understand the delicate situation, approached slowly and lay down just outside the closet, his presence calm and non-threatening. Something flickered briefly in Emma's eyes, a momentary awareness of the gentle dog who had found her, but then she retreated again into her traumatic silence. As paramedics carefully extracted Emma from her hiding place and began their evaluation, Sarah realized that finding the little girl was only the beginning. The real challenge would be helping her find her voice again, because right now, Emma Chun was the only witness to a brutal murder, and she was locked in a silence that might never be broken. The night that had started with a phone call was ending with more questions than answers. But at least Emma Chun was alive. In Sarah's experience, where there was life, there was always hope, even when that hope seemed as fragile as a 3-year-old's whispered dreams. Dr. Patricia Hayes had encountered many traumatized children in her 25 years as a clinical child psychologist. But Emma Chun's case haunted her in ways she hadn't expected. 6 months had passed since that terrible October night, and the little girl who had once chattered nonstop about her stuffed animals, favorite cartoons, and imaginary tea parties remained locked in impenetrable silence. The specialist's office on the 3rd floor of Children's Memorial Hospital had been carefully designed to feel welcoming rather than clinical. Soft pastel walls displayed colorful artwork created by young patients, while shelves lined with toys, books, and art supplies invited exploration and play. A small sandbox sat in one corner next to a dollhouse, and comfortable beanbags were scattered around a low table perfect for a child's height. Yet despite all these carefully chosen elements meant to encourage communication, Emma Chun sat in the same chair every Tuesday and Thursday, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, Mr. Whiskers, and staring at something only she could see. "Good morning, Emma," Dr. Hayes said gently, settling into her usual spot across from the 3-year-old. "I brought some new crayons today. Would you like to draw with me?" Emma's response was the same as always, a barely perceptible shake of her head, followed by that 1,000-yard stare that seemed to look right through everything and everyone around her. Her parents, Dr. James Chun and Lisa, sat in the waiting room during these sessions, their hope dimming a little more with each passing week. Dr. Hayes opened her case file, reviewing notes from previous sessions, while observing Emma's body language. The child showed classic signs of severe psychological trauma, selective mutism, hypervigilance, and what appeared to be dissociative episodes where she seemed to mentally leave her physical surroundings entirely. What made Emma's case particularly challenging was her age at 3 years old. She lacked the cognitive development and vocabulary to process what she had experienced, even if she had been willing to communicate. "I know today is hard, Dr. Hayes continued, her voice maintaining the same calm, reassuring tone she used in every session. "Sometimes when scary things happen, our voices hide inside us. That's okay. Your voice will come back when you're ready." The previous week, Dr. Hayes had tried a new approach, bringing in therapy animals from the local Humane Society. A gentle, golden retriever named Honey had visited, along with a calm tabby cat called Whiskers, chosen specifically for his name's similarity to Emma's beloved stuffed rabbit. While Emma had shown brief flickers of interest in the animals, particularly when Honey had laid his head on her lap, she still hadn't spoken a single word. Outside in the waiting room, the strain was becoming increasingly visible on Emma's parents. Dr. James Chun, a respected cardiovascular surgeon at Metro General Hospital, was a man accustomed to solving problems with precision and expertise. But his daughter's trauma was beyond his medical knowledge, and the helplessness was eating away at his usually composed demeanor. He had taken a leave of absence from his practice, unable to concentrate on his patients when his own child was suffering. Lisa Chun, who had been a successful marketing executive before Emma's birth, had quit her job entirely after the incident. She spent her days researching child trauma specialists, alternative therapies, and success stories of children who had recovered from similar experiences. The house that had once been filled with Emma's laughter and constant chatter now felt like a mausoleum, with Lisa walking on eggshells around her silent daughter. "Dr. Hayes says these things take time," Lisa would tell worried relatives who called for updates. "Children process trauma differently than adults. We just have to be patient and keep trying." But privately, Lisa lay awake at night, terrified that her chatty, joyful daughter was gone forever, replaced by this silent, distant child who flinched at sudden sounds and woke screaming from nightmares she couldn't or wouldn't describe. Investigation into Rebecca Foster's murder had stalled almost immediately after Emma's rescue. Detective Sarah Martinez had visited the Chon home twice in the weeks following the incident, hoping that familiar surroundings might help trigger Emma's memory or encourage her to speak. Both visits had been unsuccessful. Emma had hidden behind her mother's legs, trembling visibly when she saw the detective's badge and uniform. District Attorney Michael Thompson was feeling increasing pressure from the community and Rebecca Foster's grieving parents. The young woman had been a beloved student at State University, majoring in nursing with dreams of working in pediatric care. Her murder had shocked the quiet suburban community, and everyone wanted justice. The physical evidence pointed to David Kellerman. The handyman's DNA had been found at the scene. His fingerprints were on items that had been disturbed, and his financial records showed mounting gambling debts that provided motive. But Kellerman's defense attorney, Robert Craig, was systematically dismantling the prosecution's case. The DNA could be explained by Kellerman's legitimate work at the house the previous week. The fingerprints were on a kitchen faucet he had repaired just days before the murder. Without Emma's eyewitness testimony, the case was purely circumstantial. "This is America," Craig had declared during a pretrial hearing. "We don't convict people based on suspicion and coincidence. The prosecution needs proof beyond reasonable doubt, and without the testimony of their supposed witness, a traumatized 3-year-old who hasn't spoken in months, they simply don't have a case." Thompson knew Craig was right, and the knowledge kept him awake at night. A killer might walk free because a little girl couldn't find her voice. Back in Dr. Hayes' office, she decided to try a different approach. Instead of encouraging Emma to talk about that night directly, she began telling stories about brave children who overcame difficult situations. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a little girl who had lost her voice. She carried it around in a special box in her heart, keeping it safe until she felt ready to use it again. The little girl lived in a house with people who loved her very much, and they waited patiently for her voice to come back home." Emma's head turned slightly, the first sign of engagement Dr. Hayes had seen in weeks. Encouraged, she continued the story, weaving in themes of safety, love, and the power of speaking truth when you're ready. The little girl discovered that her voice was like a butterfly in a cocoon. It needed time to grow strong enough to fly. And when it was finally ready, her voice would be more beautiful and powerful than ever before, because it had been kept safe and protected. For just a moment, Emma's grip on Mr. Whiskers loosened, and she looked directly at Dr. Hayes. The eye contact lasted only seconds, but it was progress, the first real progress they'd made since treatment began. As the session ended and Emma's parents came to collect her, Dr. Hayes felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. Emma Chun's voice was still there, hidden somewhere deep inside a traumatized 3-year-old's mind. The challenge would be creating the right conditions, the perfect combination of safety, support, and triggering stimuli to help that voice find its way back home. Little did anyone know that the key to Emma's recovery would come from an unexpected source, the same 4-legged hero who had found her that terrible night, and whose gentle presence had represented safety in her darkest hour. But that revelation would have to wait as Emma's silence stretched on, and a killer's freedom hung in the balance of a little girl's lost words. The Metro County Jail's visiting room reeked of industrial disinfectant and desperation. David Kellerman sat hunched over the metal table, his once calloused hands now soft from 6 months of incarceration, nervously fidgeting with the orange fabric of his jumpsuit. Across from him, his court-appointed defense attorney, Robert Craig, reviewed case files with the methodical precision of a man who had built his career on finding reasonable doubt in seemingly hopeless situations. "Tell me again about that day," Craig said, his pen poised over a yellow legal pad. "October 15th. Every detail, every person you spoke with, every place you went. The prosecution is going to dissect your timeline minute by minute. Kellerman ran his hands through his unwashed brown hair, a nervous habit that had intensified during his months behind bars. At 24, he looked older than his years, worn down by debt, poor decisions, and now the weight of a murder charge that could send him to prison for life. "I was at the Chun house from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., he began, his voice hoarse from another. "Sleepless night. Same as I told the cops 100 times. Mrs. Chun let me in through the back door. She always did that, so I wouldn't track mud through her fancy front hall. The kitchen sink had been backing up for a week, and Dr. Chun wanted it fixed before they hosted some dinner party." Craig made notes without looking up. Who else was there? Just Mrs. Chun and the little girl, Emma. The kid was watching cartoons in the living room when I arrived. Mrs. Chun offered me coffee. We talked about the weather, normal stuff. The sink was a bigger job than I expected. Had to snake the drain, replace some corroded fittings under the cabinet. Messy work. This was where Kellerman's story became both his salvation and his curse. His legitimate presence at the house explained away most of the physical evidence the prosecution had against him. His fingerprints on the kitchen faucet, his DNA on the cabinet doors he'd opened, even his hair follicles found in the sink trap, all could be attributed to the plumbing work he'd performed just 5 days before Rebecca Foster's murder. "Mrs. Chun paid me in cash," Kellerman continued, his voice taking on the rehearsed quality of someone who had told this story countless times. $250. "She walked me to the back door, thanked me for fixing the problem, and I left. I stopped at Murphy's Bar on Elm Street around 6:30, had a few beers, watched the game. Didn't leave until after midnight." Craig looked up sharply. "The bartender will testify to that?" "Tommy Murphy himself served me. We talked about the Giants game, argued about whether they'd make the playoffs. He'll remember." Kellerman's voice carried a desperate edge. "I never went back to that house. I had no reason to. But Detective Sarah Martinez had uncovered reasons compelling, damaging reasons that painted David Kellerman as a man driven to desperate measures. The investigation had revealed a gambling addiction that had spiraled completely out of control over the past year. Kellerman owed money to people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. Vincent "Vinny" Torino ran an illegal gambling operation out of the back room of a downtown auto repair shop. When Martinez and her partner had questioned him, Vinny had been surprisingly cooperative criminals who ran successful operations, didn't appreciate when their clients committed high-profile murders that brought police attention to their businesses. "Yeah, Dave owed me money," Vinny had told them, his thick Boston accent making every word sound like a threat. 12,000, to be exact. Started with small bets on football games, but the kid had no discipline. Kept doubling down, chasing losses with bigger bets. By October, he was in deep. The timeline was damning. Kellerman had borrowed money from legitimate sources first, his credit cards, a personal loan from his bank, even pawning his father's watch and his own tools. But by early October, those options were exhausted. Vinny Torino had given him until Halloween to pay up, and everyone in that world knew what happened to people who defaulted on debts to men like Vinny. Dr. James Chun's house represented everything Kellerman couldn't afford, but desperately needed. During his week of plumbing work, he had seen expensive electronics, jewelry left casually on dresser tops, and what appeared to be a wall safe behind a painting in the home office. Lisa Chun had mentioned during their casual conversations that she and her husband would be attending a medical conference dinner on October 20th, information that Kellerman had filed away without conscious thought at the time. But as his debt deadline approached and Vinny's enforcers began making pointed visits to his apartment, that casual information took on new significance. The Chun house would be empty, except for a teenage babysitter. It should have been a simple burglary: get in, grab enough valuables to pay off his debt, get out. No one was supposed to get hurt. The thing is, Kellerman told his lawyer, his voice dropping to a whisper, I thought about it. I'm not going to lie to you. I drove by that house 3 times the week before it happened. I sat in my truck, looking at those windows, thinking about how easy it would be. Craig's pen stopped moving. This was the kind of admission that could destroy a defense case, but he needed to hear it. But you didn't do it. No, Kellerman's voice cracked with emotion. I couldn't. Every time I thought about actually going through with it, I kept seeing that little girl's face. Emma. She was so sweet, you know. Showed me her stuffed rabbit, told me about her imaginary friend. I couldn't do that to her family. The prosecution's theory was simple and compelling. David Kellerman had returned to the Chun house on October 20th, using the key he had secretly copied during his legitimate work there. He had expected the house to be empty, except for the babysitter, planning a quick burglary to solve his financial problems. But Rebecca Foster had been alert and responsible. She had confronted him, perhaps even recognized him from his previous work at the house. In panic and desperation, Kellerman had struck her with a wrench from his tool bag, killing her instantly. The murder weapon had never been found, but investigators had discovered that one wrench was missing from Kellerman's toolkit, a 14-inch pipe wrench that matched the dimensions of Rebecca's head wound. Kellerman claimed he had lost it weeks earlier on another job, but couldn't remember which job or provide witnesses to corroborate his story. What made the case particularly tragic was that it might have been avoided entirely. Rebecca Foster's autopsy had revealed that she was pregnant 6 weeks along, though she apparently hadn't known it yet. 2 lives had been lost that night, all because of one man's gambling addiction and poor choices. In his cell at night, Kellerman was haunted not just by the possibility of life in prison, but by the knowledge that his moment of weakness, that split second when he had decided to copy the Chun family's house key, had set in motion a chain of events that destroyed multiple lives. Even if he was innocent of the actual murder, he knew his actions had contributed to the tragedy. They're going to paint me as a monster, Kellerman told Craig during one of their final pre-trial meetings. A guy who killed a pregnant college student and traumatized a 3-year-old kid. How do I defend against that when I know I thought about robbing them? Craig closed his briefcase and looked at his client with the weary expression of a man who had defended too many guilty people and watched too many innocent ones get convicted. The prosecution has to prove you actually did it, not just that you thought about it. Without the little girl's testimony, their case is circumstantial. We just need to create enough reasonable doubt. But both men knew the truth. In a case involving a murdered pregnant woman and a traumatized child, reasonable doubt might not be enough. The community wanted justice, and David Kellerman was the only suspect they had. Whether he was guilty or innocent might matter less than whether 12 jurors could look at him and believe he deserved the benefit of that doubt. As the trial date approached, Kellerman found himself hoping for something he had never expected to want, that Emma Chun would find her voice again, not to condemn him, but to tell the truth about what really happened that night. Because despite everything, despite his debts and his mistakes and his moment of weakness with the house key, David Kellerman maintained his innocence, and somewhere in the silence of a traumatized 3-year-old lay the only testimony that could either save him or seal his fate forever. The emergency meeting took place in District Attorney Michael Thompson's corner office on a gray April morning, with spring rain streaking the windows and the weight of an impossible decision hanging heavy in the air. Around the mahogany conference table sat the key players who would determine Emma Chun's fate. Her parents, Dr. James and Lisa Chun, child psychologist Dr. Patricia Hayes, prosecutor Amanda Rodriguez, no relation to the canine officer, and victim advocate Sarah Kim. Absolutely not, Dr. Hayes said firmly, her usually calm demeanor showing cracks of fierce protectiveness. Emma is not ready for this kind of exposure. The trauma of testifying could set her back years, possibly permanently. We're talking about a 3-year-old child who has been selectively mute for 6 months. Thompson leaned forward, his weathered face showing the strain of the past months. At 58, he had prosecuted hundreds of cases, but none had kept him awake at night like this one. Doctor, I understand your concerns, but we're running out of options. The judge has scheduled jury selection for next month. Without Emma's testimony, David Kellerman is going to walk free. Maybe he should. Dr. Hayes shot back, surprising everyone in the room. Maybe the system is designed to let guilty people go free, rather than traumatize innocent children. Emma didn't ask to be a witness to murder. Lisa Chun had been silent throughout most of the meeting, but now she spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. What if she never gets better? What if keeping her away from the trial means she stays locked in this silence forever? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Everyone in the room had considered this possibility, but hearing it voiced by Emma's own mother made it real in a way that was almost unbearable. Dr. James Chun, who had remained stoic throughout the months of his daughter's trauma, suddenly broke down. She used to sing to her stuffed animals, he said, tears streaming down his face. Every morning, she would wake up singing some song she'd made up about Mr. Whiskers going on adventures. Now she won't even look at him some days. Sarah Kim, the victim advocate, had been taking notes throughout the meeting. She had worked with trauma victims for over a decade and understood the delicate balance between seeking justice and protecting the innocent. There might be a middle ground, she suggested carefully. What if we could create an environment where Emma feels completely safe? Minimal people in the courtroom, familiar faces only, and an immediate exit strategy if she shows any signs of distress. Thompson nodded eagerly. Judge Bradshaw has already agreed to clear the gallery except for immediate family and essential personnel. No media, no spectators. We could set up a closed-circuit feed for the press. It's not about the number of people, Dr. Hayes insisted. It's about what testifying might do to her psychologically. Emma has built walls around the memory of that night. Forcing her to access those memories in a formal, intimidating environment could shatter what little progress we've made. The meeting was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Thompson's secretary entered hesitantly. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Rebecca Foster's parents are here. They're asking for an update on the trial. The Foster family had been Thompson's constant reminder of what was at stake. Robert and Margaret Foster had lost their only daughter, a bright young woman who had died protecting someone else's child. They attended every hearing, every pre-trial motion, their grief a palpable presence that followed Thompson home each night. Give us 5 more minutes, Thompson said quietly. After the secretary left, the room fell silent again. Finally, Lisa Chun spoke. We've been thinking about this for weeks. James and I have talked about it every night. We know what Dr. Hayes is saying, and we're terrified. But we're also terrified that Emma will never heal if she doesn't face this. Dr. James Chun wiped his eyes and straightened in his chair, calling upon the same composure that had served him through countless medical emergencies. Emma was always the bravest little girl I knew. Before this happened, she would stand up to kids twice her size if they were being mean to someone smaller. Maybe giving her the chance to tell the truth about what happened to Rebecca is what she needs to find herself again. Dr. Hayes studied Emma's parents carefully. As a psychologist, she understood that healing sometimes required confronting trauma rather than avoiding it. But Emma was so young, so fragile. If we do this, she said slowly, it has to be completely on Emma's terms. The moment she shows distress, the moment she retreats into herself, we stop, no matter what it means for the case. Thompson nodded quickly. Absolutely. The child's welfare comes first. And I want to prepare her extensively, Dr. Hayes continued. We need at least 3 weeks of intensive preparation. I want her to visit the courtroom when it's empty, to meet the judge in her chambers, to understand exactly what will happen and when. No surprises. Prosecutor Amanda Rodriguez had been quietly reviewing her case files throughout the meeting. Now she looked up with concern. There's something else we need to consider. Defense attorney Robert Craig is going to object to Emma testifying. He'll argue that a 3-year-old's testimony is unreliable, that she's been coached, that her memories have been contaminated by months of therapy. Can he prevent her from testifying altogether? Lisa Chun asked, fear creeping into her voice. Unlikely, Rodriguez replied. But he can make it very difficult. He'll request extensive voir dire questioning, psychological evaluations, competency, hearings. He'll do everything he can to discredit her before she even speaks. Thompson stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked courthouse steps where protesters had gathered for weeks, some demanding justice for Rebecca Foster, others questioning whether a child should be put through the trauma of testimony. The case had divided the community, with passionate opinions on both sides. There's something else, he said without turning around. The governor's office has been calling. This case has national attention now. If Kellerman walks because we can't prove our case, there will be consequences. Political consequences. Dr. Hayes stood up abruptly. Are you seriously suggesting that political pressure should influence our decision about a traumatized child? No, Thompson said quickly, turning back to face the room. I'm saying that this case is bigger than just us now. Whatever we decide, we need to be sure it's the right decision, because everyone will be watching. The meeting ended with a tentative agreement to proceed, but with extensive safeguards in place. Emma would be prepared gradually, with multiple visits to the courthouse and meetings with all the key personnel. Dr. Hayes would be present throughout her testimony, and at the first sign of distress, the session would end immediately. As the participants filed out of Thompson's office, each carrying the weight of their difficult decision, none of them could have predicted the miracle that was about to unfold. They had spent months focused on the challenge of getting Emma to speak, never imagining that when her voice finally returned, it would come not from careful preparation or therapeutic breakthrough, but from an unexpected reunion with the four-legged hero who had saved her life that terrible October night. The stage was set for a trial that would test not just the guilt or innocence of David Kellerman, but the resilience of a little girl whose silence held the key to justice for a young woman who had died protecting her. In 3 weeks, Emma Chun would enter a courtroom, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning of May 15th dawned crisp and clear, but the serenity of the spring day stood in stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing inside the Metro County Courthouse. By 7 a.m., news vans lined the street like a convoy of metal vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky as reporters prepared for what many were calling the trial of the decade. Police barriers kept crowds of onlookers at bay, while protesters on both sides held signs demanding either justice for Rebecca or protect Emma's privacy. Inside the courthouse, security had been tripled. Metal detectors hummed constantly as courthouse personnel, attorneys, and the limited pool of approved observers passed through. Judge Eleanor Bradshaw had issued strict orders: no cameras inside the courtroom, no recording devices, and absolutely no disruptions of any kind. Anyone who violated these rules would be removed immediately and face contempt charges. Emma Chun sat in the back seat of her father's Mercedes, her small hands gripping Mr. Whiskers so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The stuffed rabbit once pristine cream-colored fur, now showed the wear of 6 months of constant companionship. One ear was slightly frayed, and a small patch on his chest had been worn smooth by Emma's anxious fingers. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Lisa Chun asked gently, turning in her seat to look at her daughter. Emma's dark eyes met her mother's briefly before darting away toward the courthouse steps. She gave the smallest nod, the closest thing to communication she had offered in days. Dr. Patricia Hayes had arrived an hour earlier to make final preparations. She had transformed the small conference room adjacent to the courtroom into a comfort zone for Emma, complete with familiar toys, soft lighting, and a direct path to exit the building if needed. Every detail had been carefully planned to minimize Emma's stress, yet Dr. Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into uncharted territory. "Remember," she had told Emma's parents during their final preparation session, "if Emma shows any signs of distress, if she starts to dissociate, if she begins trembling, if she retreats into herself, we stop immediately. Her well-being is more important than any legal proceeding." District Attorney Michael Thompson paced in his office, reviewing his opening statement for the dozenth time. His career had been built on high-profile prosecutions, but none had carried the personal weight of this case. Rebecca Foster's parents sat in his outer office, their faces etched with grief and desperate hope that justice would finally be served for their daughter. "The physical evidence is solid," Prosecutor Amanda Rodriguez reminded him as she organized their case files. Kellerman's DNA, his fingerprints, his financial motive, his access to the house. "Even without Emma's testimony, we have a strong circumstantial case." Thompson nodded, but they both knew the truth. Defense attorney Robert Craig was one of the best criminal lawyers in the state, and he had built his reputation on creating reasonable doubt from circumstantial evidence. Without Emma's eyewitness account, Craig would systematically dismantle their case piece by piece. 3 floors below, in the holding area of the courthouse jail, David Kellerman sat in his orange jumpsuit, his legs shaking with nervous energy. His mother had visited the previous evening, her tear-stained face a reminder of how many lives this case had destroyed. Whether he was guilty or innocent, Kellerman knew that his choices, his gambling, his debts, his moment of weakness in copying the Chun family's house key had set these tragic events in motion. "Today is about truth," Robert Craig had told him during their final meeting. "We stick to the facts, we challenge their assumptions, and we remember that in America, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. They have to prove you're guilty. You don't have to prove you're innocent." At 9 a.m. sharp, Judge Bradshaw called the court to session. The courtroom, normally packed with spectators and media, felt almost empty with only the essential personnel present. Emma's parents sat in the front row on the prosecution side, while Robert and Margaret Foster occupied the seats directly behind them, their presence a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Emma herself remained in the conference room with Dr. Hayes, watching through a closed-circuit monitor that had been set up per the judge's special arrangements. The plan was for her to observe the proceedings until it was time for her potential testimony, allowing her to become comfortable with the environment and the people involved. Judge Bradshaw, a 20-year veteran of the bench known for her fairness and no-nonsense approach, addressed the jury before opening statements began. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case involves the tragic death of a young woman and the testimony of a child who witnessed traumatic events. I expect you to consider all evidence fairly and objectively, keeping in mind that your duty is to determine guilt or innocence based solely on the facts presented in this courtroom." Thompson's opening statement was methodical and powerful. He painted a picture of David Kellerman as a desperate man driven to burglary by gambling debts, whose simple theft had turned to murder when confronted by brave Rebecca Foster. "The evidence will show," Thompson declared, making eye contact with each juror. that the defendant had means, motive, and opportunity. He had worked in the Chun home. He knew their schedules. He had copied their house key, and he was desperate for money to pay dangerous creditors. When Rebecca Foster confronted him on the night of October 20th, he killed her to avoid identification. Craig's opening statement was equally compelling, but took a completely different approach. He portrayed Kellerman as a working man who had made mistakes, but wasn't a killer. The prosecution wants you to believe that my client committed murder. Based on suppositions and coincidences, Craig told the jury, his voice carrying the weight of reasonable doubt. Yes, David Kellerman had financial problems. Yes, he had worked at the Chun house. But having problems and having access doesn't make someone a murderer. A prosecution's case is built on assumptions, not facts. As the trial progressed through its first day, the prosecution methodically presented their evidence. Crime scene photographs showed the brutal reality of Rebecca's death, while forensic experts explained the DNA evidence and timeline. Detective Sarah Martinez testified about the investigation, her professional demeanor masking the emotional toll the case had taken on her. But with each piece of evidence, Craig struck back with alternative explanations. The DNA was from legitimate work. The fingerprints were from authorized access. The timeline allowed for other possibilities. He was systematically creating the reasonable doubt that could free his client. In the conference room, Emma watched. It all with an intensity that surprised Dr. Hayes. The little girl who had been withdrawn and unresponsive for months was paying careful attention to every detail of the proceedings. When Detective Martinez appeared on screen, Emma's grip on Mr. Whiskers tightened. When they showed photographs of her house, she leaned forward slightly. She's processing everything, Dr. Hayes noted to the victim advocate who was monitoring. Emma's reactions. This might be exactly what she needs, seeing the truth acknowledged in an official setting. By the end of the first day, both sides had presented strong cases, but the trial's outcome remained uncertain. Thompson had proven that Kellerman could have committed the murder, while Craig had shown that someone else might have been responsible. The missing piece, the crucial testimony that could tip the scales of justice, remained locked in the silence of a 3-year-old girl. As the courthouse emptied and Emma was escorted home, none of the participants could have predicted that. The breakthrough they all hoped for would come not from careful legal strategy or therapeutic intervention, but from an unexpected encounter with a 4-legged hero whose presence would unlock memories that had been buried beneath months of trauma and fear. The stage was set for a moment that would change everything, though that moment was still 2 days away, when a German shepherd named Bruno would enter the courtroom and help a little girl find her voice again. The third day of David Kellerman's trial began like any other, with the familiar routine of security checks, legal preparations, and the measured pace of courtroom proceedings. But beneath the surface of normalcy, an electric tension hummed through the courthouse corridors. Today, the prosecution would present their final pieces of evidence, and everyone knew that Emma Chan's potential testimony loomed on the horizon like an approaching storm. In the small conference room that had become Emma's sanctuary, Dr. Patricia Hayes noticed something different about the little girl's demeanor. For 2 days, Emma had watched the trial proceedings with growing attention, but this morning she seemed almost restless, her dark eyes darting between the closed-circuit monitor and the door leading to the main courtroom. "Would you like to color, Emma?" Dr. Hayes offered, sliding a box of crayons across the small table. But Emma shook her head, her gaze returning to the screen where Prosecutor Amanda Rodriguez was organizing her files for the day's testimony. District Attorney Michael Thompson stood before Judge Eleanor Bradshaw, consulting his notes for what he hoped would be a pivotal moment in the trial. "Your Honor," the prosecution calls Officer Mark Rodriguez to demonstrate the crime scene processing procedures used on the night of October 20th. This testimony had been planned from the beginning, a way to show the jury the thoroughness and professionalism of the police investigation. Officer Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran of the Metro Police Department, and his methodical approach to crime scene processing had been crucial in gathering the evidence against Kellerman. But there was one detail that everyone had overlooked. In their planning, one factor that would transform this routine testimony into something extraordinary. Officer Rodriguez needed his K-9 partner, Bruno, to demonstrate how they had tracked evidence and located Emma that terrible night. The German Shepherd was an integral part of their team, and his role in finding the hidden child was crucial to understanding how the investigation had unfolded. Judge Bradshaw had initially been reluctant to allow Bruno in the courtroom, concerned about the emotional impact on Emma if she decided to testify. But Dr. Hayes had argued that seeing Bruno might actually be therapeutic, given the dog's role in Emma's rescue. The judge had ultimately agreed, with the understanding that Bruno would remain calm and professional, as he had been trained to do. In the holding area beneath the courthouse, Officer Rodriguez performed his pre-testimony ritual of checking his equipment and reviewing his notes. Bruno sat beside him, alert and patient, his intelligent brown eyes reflecting the same professionalism that had made him one of the department's most reliable K-9 officers. "Just another day at work, boy," Rodriguez murmured, running his hand through Bruno's thick fur. The German Shepherd had been his partner for 5 years, and they had developed the kind of wordless communication that comes from facing danger. Together, Rodriguez had no idea that today would become the most important testimony of his career, not because of what he would say, but because of what his four-legged partner would inspire. At 10:15 a.m., Officer Rodriguez and Bruno entered the courtroom through the main doors. The German Shepherd moved with confident grace, his black and tan coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his posture alert but relaxed. He had been in courtrooms before, always maintaining the perfect behavior expected of a police service animal. The moment Bruno appeared on the closed-circuit monitor in Emma's conference room, something extraordinary happened. The little girl who had been silent for 6 months suddenly stood up from her chair, her small body trembling with an emotion that Dr. Hayes couldn't immediately identify. "Emma?" Dr. Hayes asked gently, rising from her own chair. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma's eyes were fixed on the screen, watching as Bruno took his position beside Officer Rodriguez at the witness stand. Her grip on Mr. Whiskers loosened for the first time in months, and the stuffed rabbit tumbled to the floor, something that would have sent Emma into panic attacks just days earlier. In the courtroom, Officer Rodriguez began his testimony, explaining the procedures his team had followed on the night of October 20th. "Bruno and I arrived at the scene at approximately 2:45 a.m., he testified, his voice carrying the professional tone of someone who had given similar testimony dozens of times. "Our primary objective was to search for the missing child, Emma Chan." As Rodriguez spoke, Bruno remained perfectly still beside him, occasionally glancing around the courtroom with the calm alertness that marked him as a seasoned professional. The German Shepherd had no way of knowing that 3 floors away, a little girl was experiencing a breakthrough that would change everything. "Tell us about finding Emma," Prosecutor Rodriguez requested, her voice careful and measured. "Bruno located her scent trail within minutes of our arrival," Officer Rodriguez explained. "He led us directly to the master bedroom closet, where Emma was hiding. She appeared to be in shock, unresponsive to verbal commands or attempts at physical contact." In the conference room, Dr. Hayes watched in amazement as Emma suddenly moved toward the door. Not the hesitant, fearful movements she had displayed for months, but purposeful steps driven by something Dr. Hayes had never seen in the traumatized child: determination. "Emma, where are you going?" Dr. Hayes asked, but something in the little girl's posture told her not to interfere. This was a moment that had been building for 6 months, and all the careful therapy and preparation in the world couldn't have created what was happening naturally. Emma reached for the door handle, standing on her tiptoes to grasp it properly. For the first time since the night of the murder, she was taking control of her own actions, making her own choice about what came next. Back in the courtroom, Officer Rodriguez continued his testimony, unaware of the drama unfolding just yards away. Bruno's training includes victim location and evidence detection. That night, his priority was finding the child safely. Defense. Attorney Robert Craig had planned to cross-examine Rodriguez extensively, poking holes in the police procedures and suggesting alternative explanations for the evidence. But as he watched the officer and his canine partner, Craig realized that this testimony was actually helping his case. It showed that the police had done their job professionally, which supported his argument that if evidence pointed to someone else, they would have found it. Judge Bradshaw was about to call for a brief recess when the courtroom's main doors opened quietly. Dr. Hayes appeared first, her face showing a mixture of anxiety and hope that everyone in the room immediately recognized as significant. Behind her, moving with small but determined steps, came Emma Chun. The 3-year-old girl walked into the courtroom, holding Dr. Hayes' hand, but her eyes were fixed solely on Bruno, the German shepherd with the instincts that had made him. An exceptional police dog sensed something important was happening. His ears perked forward, and he turned his head toward the small figure approaching. Emma stopped about 10 feet away from the witness stand, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing courtroom. The silence was so complete that the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed deafeningly loud. Every person in the room, the judge, the attorneys, the jury, the court reporter, held their breath as they witnessed something unprecedented. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, Emma Chun and Bruno, the police dog, looked at each other across the courtroom. In that gaze was recognition, memory, and something else. A connection forged in the darkness, the most terrifying night of a little girl's life, when a gentle dog had found her in her hiding place and stayed with her until safety arrived. Then, in a voice that was small but crystal clear in the absolute silence of the courtroom, Emma Chun pointed at Bruno and spoke her first words in 6 months. "He helped me." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispered exclamations. But Emma wasn't finished. As if a dam had burst inside her, the words began flowing with increasing strength and clarity. "The nice doggy found me in the closet. He was gentle. He didn't let the bad man hurt me more. He stayed with me until Daddy came." Judge Bradshaw's gavel came down firmly, but not to restore order, to mark the moment when justice and healing converged in the most unexpected way possible. Emma Chun had found her voice, and with it, she would finally tell the truth about what had happened on that terrible October night. The courtroom remained suspended in that profound moment of silence after Emma's first words, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Judge Eleanor Bradshaw, who had presided over countless dramatic moments in her 20-year career, had never witnessed anything quite like this. The transformation of a traumatized, silent child into a witness was unfolding before everyone's eyes, and she knew that how they handled the next few minutes would determine not just the outcome of David Kellerman's trial, but potentially Emma Chun's entire future. "Dr. Hayes," Judge Bradshaw said softly, her usual authoritative tone replaced by something gentler. "Is Emma prepared to continue?" Dr. Patricia Hayes knelt beside Emma, studying the little girl's face carefully for any signs of distress or regression. What she saw surprised her. Emma's posture was more upright than it had been in months. Her breathing was steady, and most remarkably, she was maintaining eye contact not just with Bruno, but with the adults around her. "Emma," Dr. Hayes whispered, "would you like to tell everyone what you remember about that night? You're safe here, and Bruno is here with you." Emma nodded, a small but deliberate movement that sent ripples of anticipation through the courtroom. District Attorney Michael Thompson felt his heart racing as he realized they were about to hear the testimony that could make or break their case. Defense Attorney Robert Craig, meanwhile, was already calculating how to challenge the reliability of a 3-year-old's memories. After months of potential therapeutic influence, "Your Honor," Craig interjected, rising from his seat, "I must object to this irregular procedure. The witness hasn't been sworn in, hasn't been properly questioned about her competency to testify." "And, Mr. Craig," Judge Bradshaw interrupted firmly, "I'm going to allow this child to speak. We can address procedural matters afterward. Please, sit down." Emma had been watching this exchange with growing confidence. The formal environment that should have intimidated her was instead providing the structure she needed to organize her memories and find her voice. She looked directly at Judge Bradshaw and said, in a clear voice that carried throughout the silent courtroom, "The bad man came to our house." Prosecutor Amanda Rodriguez moved closer, but not so close as to seem threatening. She had prepared for this moment extensively, knowing that how she questioned Emma would be crucial. "Emma, can you tell us about the bad man?" "He had lots of tools," Emma replied, her small hands gesturing to indicate a belt around her waist. "Heavy tools that made noise when he walked. He came through the back door with a key." This detail sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The prosecution had theorized that Kellerman had used a coppered key, but they had never been able to prove it. Now, from the mouth of their youngest witness, came confirmation of a crucial element of their case. "What happened when the bad man came inside?" Rodriguez asked gently. Emma's voice grew stronger as she continued, the words seeming to flow more easily now that she had started. "Rebecca was studying at the kitchen table. She had her books and her coffee. She looked up when she heard the back door." In the defendant's chair, David Kellerman felt his world shifting. The little girl's description was painting a picture that aligned perfectly with the prosecution's theory. But something about her certainty, her specific details, was more frightening than any physical evidence had been. "Rebecca stood up fast," Emma continued, her eyes now focused on some point in the distance as she accessed memories that had been locked away for months. "She said, 'You're not supposed to be here. Dr. Chon didn't call you.' The bad man got angry." Dr. Hayes remained close to Emma, monitoring her emotional state carefully. Remarkably, the child seemed to be gaining strength from telling her story rather than being traumatized by it. The therapeutic theory of trauma recovery through controlled narrative was playing out in real time. "What did the bad man say?" Rodriguez asked. "He said bad words," Emma replied, wrinkling her nose with the disapproval that only a 3-year-old could muster. "He said he needed money, and Rebecca should mind her own business. Rebecca picked up her phone to call Daddy, but the bad man grabbed it away." The courtroom was completely silent, except for Emma's voice and the quiet scratching of the court reporter's fingers on her stenography machine. Every detail Emma provided was being preserved for legal history, but more importantly, it was providing the missing pieces of a puzzle that had haunted investigators for months. "Then what happened, Emma?" Rodriguez continued, her voice carefully controlled despite the emotional weight of the testimony. "Rebecca told me to run and hide," Emma said, her voice showing the first signs of strain. "She said hide in Mommy's closet and don't come out until Daddy comes. She was scared, but she was trying to protect me." Dr. Hayes noticed Emma's increased breathing and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're doing great, Emma. You're very brave." Emma looked at Dr. Hayes and then at Bruno, who had remained perfectly still throughout her testimony, as if understanding his role as her anchor to safety. Drawing strength from the dog's calm presence, she continued, "I ran to Mommy's closet, but I could still hear them fighting. The bad man was yelling about money he owed to mean people." Rebecca said she would call the police. That's when he hit her. The little girl's voice dropped to almost a whisper for this part, but in the absolute silence of the courtroom, every word was audible. I heard Rebecca fall down. Then it got very quiet. I was scared to come out. Thompson felt tears threatening as he listened to this brave child recount the most terrifying experience of her young life. But he also felt the satisfaction of a prosecutor who knew his case was being proven beyond any reasonable doubt. "How long did you stay in the closet, Emma?" Rodriguez asked. "A long time," Emma replied. "The bad man walked around the house. For a while. I heard him opening drawers and moving things. Then he left through the back door again. And then? I stayed hidden because Rebecca told me to wait for Daddy. I was too scared to come out. But then I heard different people in the house, and the nice doggy found me." Emma looked directly at Bruno. He was gentle and didn't bark at me. He stayed with me until Daddy came. Defense attorney Craig knew his case was crumbling with every word from Emma's mouth, but he had to try to create doubt. When given the opportunity to cross-examine, he approached very carefully, knowing that being too aggressive with a child witness could backfire spectacularly. "Emma," he said gently, "you said this happened at night, and you were hiding in a dark closet. Could you really see everything that happened?" Emma considered this question seriously, displaying the thoughtfulness that had always characterized her personality before the trauma. "I could see the bad man when he first came in. The kitchen light was on, and I heard everything. But Emma, you've been talking to doctors and police officers for months. Are you sure you remember what really happened, or what people have told you happened?" This question prompted Dr. Hayes to intervene. "Your Honor, the defense is asking a 3-year-old to analyze the reliability of her own memory formation. This is inappropriate." But Emma surprised everyone by answering on her own. "I remember because I was scared. I remember Rebecca's voice when she told me to hide. I remember the bad man's tools making noise. I remember Bruno's fur was soft when he found me." As Emma's testimony concluded, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. She had provided not just evidence, but a complete narrative of that terrible night that corroborated every piece of physical evidence the prosecution had presented. More importantly, she had shown a courage and resilience that transformed her from victim to survivor. Judge Bradshaw called for a recess, but before the courtroom emptied, something remarkable happened. Emma walked over to David Kellerman, looked up at him with the fearless honesty that children possess, and said simply, "You hurt Rebecca. That was wrong." Kellerman, faced with the pure moral clarity of a child's judgment, finally broke down and confessed. The trial was effectively over, but Emma's healing was just beginning. The confession that David Kellerman whispered through his tears in that hushed courtroom changed everything in an instant. "She's right," he sobbed, his voice barely audible as he looked at Emma Chun's unwavering gaze. "I hurt Rebecca. God help me, I killed her." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, bringing 6 months of uncertainty to a sudden, definitive end. Judge Eleanor Bradshaw immediately ordered the jury removed and called for an emergency hearing to address Kellerman's spontaneous confession. Defense attorney Robert Craig frantically tried to advise his client to remain silent, but the psychological dam had burst. Faced with the pure moral clarity of a 3-year-old's judgment, Kellerman couldn't maintain his facade of innocence any longer. "I never meant for anyone to die," Kellerman continued, his hands shaking as courthouse deputies prepared to restrain him. "I just needed money. When Rebecca confronted me, when she threatened to call the police ... I panicked. I grabbed my wrench. And ... and everything went wrong." District Attorney Michael Thompson felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness as he watched Kellerman's breakdown. Justice was being served, but at such a terrible cost. Rebecca Foster was still dead, Emma Chun was still traumatized, and multiple families had been destroyed by one man's poor choices and moment of desperate violence. In the aftermath of the confession, the formal trial proceedings became a matter of legal procedure rather than contested evidence. Kellerman's guilty plea to first-degree murder and attempted burglary was entered into the record, and Judge Bradshaw scheduled sentencing for the following month. The prosecution's request for life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole, seemed certain to be granted. But for Emma Chun, the end of the trial marked the beginning of something even more important than legal justice, her journey back to herself. 3 weeks after Kellerman's confession, on a bright June morning that seemed to sparkle with possibility, a special ceremony took place at Metro Police Department headquarters. The media had been invited, but this time their presence felt celebratory, rather than intrusive. Emma Chun, wearing a yellow sundress that her grandmother had bought specially for the occasion, stood in the main briefing room, surrounded by the people who had helped save her life and bring her justice. Police Chief Maria Santos had organized the ceremony to honor K-9 Officer Bruno for his exceptional service. But everyone knew the real purpose was to celebrate Emma's remarkable recovery and the bond that had developed between a little girl and the dog who had found her in her darkest hour. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chief Santos announced to the gathered crowd, "today we honor not just exceptional police work, but the power of healing and the strength of the human spirit." Emma stood beside Officer Mark Rodriguez and Bruno no longer. The silent, traumatized child who had been rescued from a closet 6 months earlier. She chattered constantly now about her upcoming 4th birthday, her new favorite cartoons, her plans to start preschool in the fall. But most remarkably, she spoke freely about that terrible night, processing her trauma through narrative rather than being trapped by it. "Bruno is my hero," Emma announced to the crowd, her voice clear and confident as she stood at the small podium that had been adjusted to her height. "He found me when I was scared and stayed with me until Daddy came. He's the bravest doggy in the whole world." The German shepherd sat at attention beside her, his intelligent brown eyes reflecting what seemed like understanding and pride. Over the past weeks, Emma had visited Bruno several times at the police station, their bond growing stronger with each encounter. Officer Rodriguez had watched in amazement as his professional, disciplined K-9 partner showed a gentle, almost protective side with the little girl that he had never displayed with anyone else. Dr. Patricia Hayes watched from the audience, marveling at the transformation she had witnessed. Emma's recovery had defied every prediction and timeline she had established. The breakthrough that had occurred in the courtroom had unleashed not just Emma's voice, but her entire personality. The nightmares had gradually decreased, the hypervigilance had faded, and the bright, curious child who had existed before that terrible October night had emerged stronger than ever. "What we've witnessed," Dr. Hayes would later write in her case study that would be published in the Journal of Child Psychology, "is the remarkable resilience of children when provided with the right combination of safety, support, and the opportunity to reclaim their own narrative." Rebecca Foster's parents, Robert and Margaret, attended the ceremony with bittersweet emotions. Their daughter was still gone, and nothing could change that devastating reality. But seeing Emma's recovery, knowing that Rebecca's sacrifice had protected this innocent child, provided them with a sense of meaning in their grief. "Rebecca would have loved this," Margaret Foster whispered to her husband as they watched. Emma presented Bruno with a special medal she had made in art therapy. A me construction paper star covered in gold glitter with "My Hero" written in careful 3-year-old handwriting. The ceremony concluded with an announcement that surprised everyone. Dr. James and Lisa Chun had established the Rebecca Foster Foundation for Child Trauma Recovery, with Dr. Hayes as the clinical director. The foundation would provide specialized therapy for children who had witnessed violence, with a particular focus on innovative treatments, including animal-assisted therapy. Rebecca died protecting our daughter, Dr. Chun said as he addressed the crowd. The best way we can honor her memory is by helping other children find their voices and heal from trauma. 6 months later, Emma Chun started kindergarten at Meadowbrook Elementary School. Her teacher, Mrs. Anderson, had been briefed about Emma's history, but had been instructed to treat her like any other student. On the first day of school, when Mrs. Anderson asked each child to share something special about themselves, Emma raised her hand enthusiastically. "I have a police dog friend named Bruno," she announced proudly. "He saved my life, and now we help other kids who are scared find their voices too." Every few weeks, Emma would visit the police station with her parents, spending time with Bruno and Officer Rodriguez. These visits had become a highlight for the entire K-9 unit, as Emma's presence seemed to energize all the dogs and remind the officers why their work mattered. On Emma's 4th birthday, Officer Rodriguez brought Bruno to her party, an event that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. As Emma blew out her candles, surrounded by friends from preschool and family members who had feared they might never see her smile again, she made a wish that she shared with everyone. "I wished for all the scared kids to find their voices like I found mine." David Kellerman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In a victim impact statement that Emma's parents read on her behalf, the little girl had dictated a message that demonstrated wisdom far beyond her years. "I forgive the bad man because holding anger makes your heart hurt. But he needs to stay in jail so he can't hurt anyone else." The case that had begun with tragedy and silence had transformed into a story of resilience, healing, and the unbreakable bonds that can form between humans and the animals who serve alongside them. Emma Chun had not only found her voice, she had become a voice for others, proving that even the smallest survivors can speak the loudest truths. As she grew older, Emma would often tell people that Bruno didn't just find her in that closet, he helped her find herself. And in a world that sometimes seemed full of darkness, that was a light worth celebrating.